If one plays an instrument like a trumpet or a tuba, a trombone, a saxophone, or a clarinet, maybe some drums or that have different tones, or string instruments like violins, guitars, pianos, and organs, from time to time they become out of tune. Sometimes it's the atmosphere, the hot and the dry, versus cold and wet. It all plays havoc on instruments, and from time to time they become out of tune. Some instruments, the more you play it, and after a while the strings loosen up and they need to be tuned. People are like those instruments. We become out of tune, or we get banged around from the storms, the tests, the trials, situations we go through at times. It may be an illness, maybe an accident, maybe we injure part of our body. Sometimes people for economic hardships, or a hardship of some kind, maybe losing a family member or a friend. We become out of tune with what life throws at us. It doesn't matter if you're a child, teen, young adult, middle-aged, or in your golden years. It happens. And sometimes when old gifts and talents don't work anymore, new and other gifts and talents take over. I would like to share some stories from the Bible about people who were out of tune. Back in Jesus' time, when he walked the earth, if you were possessed, lame, blind, ill, leprosy, or health issues, you were with sin. It was like a curse of sin. Luke 8:43 through 48 shares a story of a woman who had been hemorrhaging for 12 years. She spent money on doctors and they could not stop her bleeding. Jesus was walking through their town where she lived, but there was such a crowd around him. She tried to get to him, but the crowd was too thick. But she finally pushes through and she touches his cloak. And power from Jesus discharged into the woman. And the flow of blood stopped in the woman. Jesus stops and asks, "Who touched me?" People denied touching Jesus, and Peter said, "Well, you were among all these people. Any one of them could have brushed up against you." But Jesus said, "No, someone touched me. I felt my power go out to that person." The woman spoke up and said, "I touched you," and she fell at his feet. The woman traveling knelt down at his feet and said she had touched him and how she was immediately healed. Jesus said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." The touch of Jesus brought her back in tune. There's another story in Luke chapter 13 about Jesus was teaching in the synagogue, and it was on the Sabbath, and a woman appeared with a spirit that had crippled her for 18 years. She was hunched over and could not stand up straight. When Jesus saw her, he felt compassion and mercy. Jesus said, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." Jesus laid his hands on her. Immediately she stood straight up and began praising God. Of course, there was a Sabbath. You weren't supposed to heal on the Sabbath. The synagogue leader spoke up saying, "There are 6 days in which to work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured, and not on the Sabbath." But Jesus responded, "You hypocrites! This daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 years, be set free on the Sabbath day. Don't you, if you have a donkey or an ox, will untie him from the manger and lead him to water?" even if it's on the Sabbath? When Jesus said this, his opponents and leaders were put to shame, and the entire crowd rejoiced. There's a third story I'd like to share with you. This story is from the Gospel of John, chapter 9. It tells the story of a blind man who had been blind since birth. The disciples asked Jesus who sinned, or his parents, that he was born blind. Jesus said, neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that the God's work might be revealed in him. Jesus said, as long as he is in the world, he is the light of the world. Jesus spat on the ground and he made mud with saliva. And Jesus spread the mud on the blind person's eyes, and he said to the blind person, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. And the person went as Jesus commanded, and immediately he could see. His friends and neighbors were amazed because this man was the man who sat on the street begging. And again, this was the Sabbath when he healed this person from blindness. The man said, it was this man, Jesus. He made mud and put it on my eyes and set me to wash in the pool of Siloam. The man received the touch of Jesus Christ. Whether it was the woman that was bleeding, she reached out and touched Jesus. But the blind person and the woman who was bent over, Jesus touched them, and they were healed. I'd like to share a story with somebody a little bit closer to our times. It's a story about Myra Brooks Welch. Myra Brooks Welch wrote the poem, Touch of the Master's Hand. Myra was born in 1877, and she came from her musical family. In her early years, she played the organ. She was the youngest of her siblings, and when her older siblings left the home, she moved to Oregon with her parents. Myra was working as a sales clerk in a store when she met Otis Melvin Welch. They were married later that year, and in 1920 they moved to Laverne, California in Los Angeles County. Myra was stricken with severe arthritis and bound to a wheelchair, and it was cruel on her hands. Myra attended a youth conference where she heard a speaker which inspired her. And just as one gift or talent ended, another took off. Her ability to write poems. Welch became known as the poet with a singing heart or soul. And in 1921, if you could imagine, if you had severe arthritis in your hands, very painful, and turning the pencils around with the erasers downward, and she typed out in 30 minutes this poem, Touch of the Master's Hand. And as a gift, Myra sent this poem to the church newsletter bulletin, which they printed. And then that church sent the story and poem to other churches and publications. And it became very widespread. Years later, at a Christian convention, they read the poem, but it was anonymous at the time who wrote it. They asked who wrote this poem. A man walked up and answered that question. It was Myra Brooks Welch's son, and said it was his mother that wrote the poem. So she was given credit for the poem. Some singers and performers have put music or music notes to the poem and performed powerful songs. But I want to share with you the poem, The Touch of the Master's Hand. 'Twas battered and scarred, and the auctioneer thought it scarcely worth his while to waste much time on the old violin, but held it up with a smile. "What am I bidding, good folks?" he cried. "Who'll start the bidding for me? $1? $1? Then 2? Only 2? $2, and who'll make it 3? $3 once? $3 twice? Going for 3, but no." From the room far back, a gray-haired man came forward and picked up the bow, then wiped the dust from the old violin and tightened up the loosened strings. He played a melody pure and sweet, as a caroling angel sings. The music ceased, and the auctioneer, with a voice that was quiet and low, said, "What am I bidding for the old violin? $1,000? Who'll make it 2? 2,000? Who'll make it 3? 3,000 once? 3,000 twice? And going and gone," said he. The people cheered, but some of them cried, "We do not quite understand what changed its worth." The touch of the Master's hand. And many a man with life out of tune and battered and scarred with sin is auctioned cheap to the thoughtless crowd, much like the old violin. A mess of pottage, a glass of wine, a game, and he travels on. He is going once and going twice. He is going and almost gone. But the Master comes, and the foolish crowd never can understand the worth of a soul and the change that is wrought by the touch of the Master's hand. Even after she could no longer play the organ, another gifted talent took over, and she put her soul and heart into the poems that she wrote. She wrote books and books of poems with her name on them. But this one poem that touched the Master's hand, that went a long time before a name was attached to that poem. The first time I heard this poem, it was in a song. And that song spoke to my heart and soul. I was going through my 20s and early 30s. It was a time where I was just doing my own thing. I was out of tune. But God didn't give up on me. He tuned up my strings, got me back into tune. And I went back to church regularly. Became involved in the activities of the church, choir, men's groups, Bible studies, Sunday school classes. And now I'm starting my 17th year as a pastor. There is a Master, and He has that touch, and that is God. And God's Son, Jesus Christ. Let God into your hearts. Let Jesus into your hearts. Let Him clean you up. Clean out your heart from all the clutter within it and tune you up. Everyone gets out of tune for one reason or another. And if we remember these stories of Jesus and His love, how He touched people and made them whole, God can do the same for you. Pray to Him. Ask Him to come into your heart And the Holy Spirit will always be with you, counseling you, guide you. May the grace of God change and transform you. For he has the touch of the Master's hand.